Design Media Arts, EDA. I'm Victoria Vesna. I'm a professor here at Design Media Arts, and I also direct the Art Science Center. And this lecture by Toni Dove is actually co-sponsored between Art Science Center and Design Media Arts. And I'm just over the moon to present to you Toni Dove, who is a pioneer in interactive arts and particularly dealing with narrative and film in a way that completely changes how we look at narrative and film and theater, and is always residing in between. So our class recently had a lecture on robotics and art and industrialization and the effect of all of the mechanization on our lives. What you'll hear from Toni is how this affects our body, our mind, and gender as well. She works and lives in New York City. She's probably the quintessential New Yorker, I would say. And she has an amazing loft with her devices and dresses. And when I enter and meet her there, I'm always just feeling like I entered into her brain. So you will actually have that opportunity. So I will not talk about too much because you all got her bio. And she is just an amazing speaker, and she's going to take you for a ride. What you need to do is give her a huge applause. Go.
I failed to put on my microphone for the streaming part of this. Hi, I'm Toni, and tonight I'm going to take you on a kind of voyage through my experience with using interactivity and what I call embodied interface, the idea of using the parts of the human perception, proprioception, the human sensorium as an interface to media, using the way we navigate, the way our biology works as a way in which we can connect to media. I've been interested, as Victoria mentioned, in cinema and in the idea of taking cinema off the wall and bringing it into the room with you. And so the first thing I'm going to show tonight is just, it's a patch that shows one of the very simplest kinds of behaviors that I've worked with. It's from a piece called SpectroPia, which is an interactive feature film, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the thing that's interesting about this piece for me is that it allows you to use video motion sensing. I'm basically scrubbing two videos with my hands. Video, you can see, is the way the camera is seeing me. The 4 black bars are called histograms. They show just what's moving in the image. And this is the basic interface that I've used for years that covers pretty much all the things that I do that are interactive. What I do is take very simple behaviors and create constellations of those behaviors that create emergent complexity. I'm not so interested in creating logic trees in creating logic trees or creating systems in which every piece of interactivity is predicted, because I feel that that's a little bit like, well, like washing your kitchen floor with a Q-tip, or, you know, peeling 50,000 grapes. I think it's creativity numbing, and I don't think it's interesting. So I think what happens is that you begin to relinquish certain kinds of control in order to create a more improvisational and malleable set of parameters that then, you know, change based on your user's behavior. And you find out which things you want to be consistent and which things you want not to be. So I'm just going to show you a little bit here, like if I back up. Okay, now she's just not moving. Now I'm going to move just the wide. I can just pass back and forth. I can make her spin back and forth. I can bring up the other screen. Let that first one fade out. So this is a very simple way of beginning to look at some of what it is that I do. The whole thing got kicked off when I did a VR piece. My introduction to interactivity began when I did a VR piece at the Banff Center for the Arts. So I'm going to show you a little bit of that tonight, just a few minutes. I think it may be one of the first narrative VR pieces. But it was what led me to start thinking about using motion sensing. I didn't want to have to use a lot of apparatus. I didn't want helmets. I didn't want gloves. I wanted something that could be transparent, which is what led me to the interface I'm showing you. But just because there's so much virtual reality going around right now and kind of emerging and coming back again, I'd like to show you a piece that happened in 1993. Actually, I'm going to start it here. Excuse me. Yeah.
When the hand first comes to you, it comes as a disembodied thing, moving in and out of your blurred vision.
I remember nothing from when I was a child.
As an infant, you begin to comprehend you can control it.
The feeling of reaching, trying to clutch at something.
This was your hand.
You reach out
in a
to
glove.
grasp, and in that act, the willing, desiring being invents
Reach
itself.
out. Grasp one of the figures.
I created small animations and worked with wireframe.
Look. Point with the camera.
To create an environment where you selected certain things that brought you through a narrative. This was because at that point, the machines that you had to work with were called reality engines, and they were the size of refrigerators, and they were purple, and they were in their own chilled room, and they didn't do texture mapping very well. So I kind of came up with an alternative set of possibilities in order to create this. This piece was a collaboration with Michael Mackenzie, who's a playwright from Montreal, and the piece was about a woman who is a coroner who lived off-world. It's a science fiction piece. And she comes back to planet Earth to look into the murder of a young girl. And she meets up with a pathologist, and you are taken out into the city through all the kind of detritus and evidence from the body of the dead child. And so there are several different environments in the piece. So I'm just going to show you a little bit more of it. Yep.
I am in shadow. High above me is a gray vault of static cloud and crumbling masonry. Stretching before me is a decrepit floor, thick with the debris of semi-nomadic habitation. I cannot decide which way to go.
So depending on which little child or animation you chose, you would go down a different path in the architecture, and there was a malleable sound environment that would alter locally depending on where you were in the
Naked
space.
and dirty, and I want to kill them for taking my clothes, my toy. Someone is there who asks me what a peach is. I say it is pink and hairy, but the only ones I've ever seen are orange and come from a can. Suddenly they throw me something. I catch it. It's a peach. Everyone laughs. They tell me I can keep it, or I can go with two people who smell and speak strangely. This is the day I will leave the city.
So this is the interface. You could do it in a helmet. It was a very large, cumbersome helmet at that point, and I've been very. Partly this experience was what led me away from wanting to work with helmets or gloves or anything that wasn't completely transparent in between you and media. But this was something that was
organized the
performed
pieces of
for an
information.
audience in this iteration.
Lists. I wonder who or what the pathologist will be. Medical
She's
lease?
in an airplane,
Online remote?
and the airplane is modeled
ER
after a human
sensor?
spine.
Probably not a remote, as the heavy metal content of the smog above the city interferes with satellite contact. It may be a self-maintaining, interactive autopsy program. Some still exist despite an international prohibition. Whatever it is, it's probably powerful and difficult. Working with these things can be like having your head stuck in a refrigerator.
This is the pathologist's lab, and you touch objects and they take you down different paths of investigation. This is his head.
I realized some time ago that my memory was beginning to play tricks. It was selective at first, like some chemically promoted neural dropout. I would simply turn around and be facing some huge void where before I knew there had once been part of a human life. My life. I felt as if I were disappearing. This is a short-term memory storage program to access the present. Pre-surgical exam. Epidermis. Hair short, nails long. Lead heavy metal content, medium for estimated age. Indications of high starch iron diet. Trace sedimentation in foot calluses, typical of sanitation precinct to bizarre precinct.
So this experience was really fascinating. And one of the things that interested me the most about working in an environment that was responsive, and there were a number of people at the Banff Center for the Arts at that time working with different kinds of responsive environments, was the way in which the feedback loop, the haptic relationship that you had with media when you're using your body as an interface would create something almost like the equivalent of synesthesia or like a trompe-l'oeil experience where you could fool your body. You know, you could be standing on on a moving board that, and your body movement would change the way water sounded, and you'd feel like your feet were getting wet, or you'd touch something that would breathe, and suddenly a hard plywood would feel soft. Because of the way your whole, sensorium is keyed into certain kinds of expectations, you could start to play with that in really interesting in really interesting ways. And I got fascinated with that. And I started thinking about the interface as being an uncanny interface, of it producing things that produce this feeling of strangeness. People would say things like it felt like an out-of-body experience, when actually what you were having was an in-body experience, because you were in your body and in the screen at the same time, and you're having this doubling experience, almost like your body has extruded into the screen, so that you're both here and there, and you're haunting the movie. The traces of your movement are appearing in the characters on the screen. And I thought, well, this is really interesting, and I want to explore this. And the first piece that I did was a piece that was built just around the time the World Wide Web was happening. And I looked at it, and what I saw was the beginnings of a very large shopping mall. And so I did this piece, Artificial Changelings. It's the story of Arethusa, who's a kleptomaniac living in Paris at the turn of the century during the rise of the department store. And she's dreaming of Zilith, who's an encryption hacker from the future. I called it a romance thriller about shopping. And, well, you'll see how I've cut out some of the credits.
Artificial Changeling.
Wait, no, I'm going to go back a little bit.
When she was about to be nervous or sad, she stole when she was excited, and she stole just for the kick of it. There must have been an erotic thrill in the danger, in that moment when she might get caught, but didn't. And of course, there was the collection of unimportant things. What were they for? Was there someone she wished to replace with useless things and a feeling of triumph? The department store had become her lover. In secret, she sliced through the surface of her skin, watching blood flow from the tiny openings. At night, she had dreams, rich with passion and vengeance. Artificial Changelings is an interactive narrative installation that uses video motion sensing to track the location and movement of a viewer standing in front of an image projected on a screen. The movement is translated into changes in picture and sound. There are 4 zones. Walking close to the screen into Zone 1 puts the viewer inside a character's head. Zone 2 places you in direct relationship to the character, as if in conversation. Zone 3 is a trance or dream space. The 4th zone is a time tunnel. One must pass through the 4th zone and re-enter the dream space to arrive in the other century of the story. Physical movement within each zone alters the video and sound in a variety of ways. It may generate speech, change the emotional tone of the sound environment, or move a character's body.
What I have to tell you is so dreadful. I shouldn't have the courage. I went to the shop to buy various things. I lost all sense of time. Wondering. Need seems such a slippery term in the face of such seduction.
It was I who took it. Hid it, stole it. It was I who took it. Hid it, stole it.
Simba.
All the time, inside, there was someone else trying to get out. Someone who wanted to speak. A child beating on the walls. At night, she dreamt about a young woman in the distant future who did more than steal. This woman was an anarchist. She could see her silhouetted against the sky,
It was a foreign sky of strange colors, and all around the woman, whose name was Zillith, was a structure, a house that lived and breathed. This house was like a circulatory system, a living thing, a huge electronically simulated organism that looked like it was made from wire and light, and Zillith stood inside it and seemed to be covered with something like a wireframe herself. Arethusa peered closer in the haze of the dream and saw that Zillith was dressed in a corset or vest and panniers made from something unfamiliar that looked like 18th century undergarments, but encased her body like protective armor. What had been inside had turned down. Zillith crept quietly into the underground chamber, peering into the darkness to be certain that she was alone and undetected. She reached in back of the apparatus that wrapped around her body like mutated panniers and tugged on the recycled fishnet bustle.
This thing is so clunky. If it wasn't a debris hybrid, I could do the whole thing in my pinky ring. Trickle down, little molecular microchips. We'll get up ahead of steam and see what shape the highways are in. What body part neural shall I map to my fingertips? Nothing too distracting. I'm an eavesdropper today.
She is hacking routers, taking over data paths, and passing through gates by decrypting secret keys to map the invisible loci of power, a researcher of distribution in the information market, a virtual urban planner from the informal sector. The air hums with the sound of cash registers ringing and shoppers purchasing goods. Her heart beating and adrenaline pumping through her system, Arethusa reaches for the sugared fruits. She clutches the trophy and stuffs it into her bag. The sugar leaves a sticky film on her fingers and stains the interior silk a dark blackish red, like the color of dried blood. More trinkets follow. Her head feels as if it would explode, and a sensation like an electric wave rolls through her body.
I must be away and clear. I am almost free. And the release. It is like flying. I could do anything. I almost feel that I could fly.
So artificial changelings was, I'm actually not going to show you this. Used the 19th century and the technological revolution to look at and try and understand the technological revolution. And that kind of time travel narrative metaphor has become something that I've worked with in a lot of different ways in order to, try and grasp the things that are transforming the world that I'm living in as I'm living in it. And when you're working, I think, with new technologies, you're also working with these materials that are changing the world you're living in. And so it's interesting to play with them, to have an immediate experience of them, to be critical of them, to think about how they're altering your life, how the absence of them or similar experiences in the past might have impacted the way different kinds of technologies have developed. I think for me, the whole thing is a kind of research project. And when I finished Artificial Changelings, I became very interested in the idea of interface and in the embodied interface, and in how interface could kind of contain within it a recipe for the suspension of disbelief that was very similar to the rules and recipes that are embedded in narrative. And I thought that if you could put those two things together, the suspension of disbelief in the interface and in the narrative, if you could put those two recipes together, that you could come up with a very powerful immersive language. And I wanted to experiment as well with a fuller narrative. So the next piece I did was called SpectroPia. SpectroPia is a feature-length movie performed by two people across 3 screens for an audience. SpectroPia, a young woman from England, 2099, lives in a salvage zone outside of an urban center with a garbage-collecting babysitter bot called the Duck. It's a culture with no recorded history, where saving anything is punishable by law. SpectroPia has built a machine that scans garbage and creates virtual realities from the moment in time the object was created. She's searching for her father, who disappeared in time, in search of a lost family inheritance. There's a glitch in her machine, and she ends up in the body of another woman in New York City in 1931, right after the stock market crash. So we get a little bit of everything in here. Luc Dubois, who is an artist who you may or may not be aware of, who does data visualization primarily, has worked with me for 15 years doing software development. And he and I performed SpectroPia. He and I performed SpectroPia for an audience. We each inhabit characters and cooperate to make the movie unfold. I thought of it as a possessed movie, one in which improvisation collides with a predetermined narrative to create a new entity, one with performers inhabiting other characters in a story within a story. And in this clip, you'll see SpectroPia using her machine to scan a piece of clothing that belonged to Sally Rand, the fan and bubble dancer who you met earlier. SpectroPia in the body of Verna, a second part of the clip, SpectroPia inside the body of Verna, a woman from 1931. She's following Verna's boyfriend, William. And then the third part is a dialogue between Verna and William, with SpectroPia inside Verna complicating the communication. What I wanted to do with SpectroPia was look at how I could take the very simple behavior that you saw with Sally, the very simple scrubbing behaviors, and create these different kinds of constellations that would constitute a kind of something similar to dialogue, to action scenes, to parallel editing, different kinds of things. It was as if I had taken a movie and taken it apart like a pocket watch and then put it back together and made a bunch of slightly different machines out of it. And so this one took me through the whole arc of a narrative.
Toni Dove and Luc Dubois use motion sensing. Their body movements will move characters, or navigate through space and alter sound. They're the Deus Ex Machina. We're the puppet show. Watch Toni again. She's pulling my strings when she moves her hands in the air.
Sally was a text-to-speech puppet, so you could type in anything you wanted her to say. Doing just what I was doing before.
She thinks she's in control, but I have the last word. You'll see.
Where's he going? If I follow him, I might find out something about him. He's very
I
secret.
can't believe I didn't get those contracts off.
She's certainly very strange.
Here we're in a zone where we're each
I don't want
inside
anyone
the
keeping an eye on me while I'm trying to pull off this deal. I need to be a
What
free
is the
agent.
point of these shoes? They aren't so easy to walk in. And the net on this hat makes me want to sneeze. It's so unfamiliar here.
Now we're leading her or him. And we can follow as well. So Luke and I are passing control back and forth. And
I had to
having
sneak
her-
out of the house.
Oh?
Yeah, she fell asleep.
I've had a rather interesting day myself, William.
Hey, what do you got? Did X leave a trail?
You certainly did. The man could not keep his pants on. If his wife knew the half of it, she'd be angry at him about more than missing assets.
Keeping secrets?
There are a lot of layers to this thing.
Don't touch me. Don't touch me. I'm delicate. You'll screw it up.
What do you do?
I make coffee. You know coffee.
You want a cup of coffee?
Ah, coffee, yeah, sure.
You look rumpled this morning.
Oh.
Feeling any better?
I'm fine, just a little tired from yesterday, I guess.
Hey, Vernon. Guess what? I've got a new case for us. Remember X? Well, he was a crook, right? When he skimmed all that money off the XYZ, I think he stashed some of it. Maybe a big chunk. We can find it, we can pay back your dad and his clients.
This body is strange. Like I'm wearing a costume. I'm inside it, and I'm peering out. But there are these alien sensations that are so disturbing.
It's very delicate.
What they're
I
not
can't tell
saying
her
is,
everything,
you're here.
but I need for her to believe me. The best way
There's
will
so
be to
much
tell a
that's
part of the
unfamiliar.
story, but not the whole
As if they
deal.
speak a slightly different language. Close. But different enough so a mistake could be fatal.
It'll be best.
When he
Everything.
stole all that money, where do you think he hid it?
No, I doubt he had a bank account under his own name. Yeah, too easy to trace.
So many secrets.
We're each speeding
Yeah,
up
but
and
secrets
slowing
didn't die with
down
him.
the character.
I doubt official records will help. Maybe the investors of the original fund.
The investors, so there's a record? I mean, that could give us some leads.
Well, there's still an XYZ company, but there's not much to it. We could go there.
They just gonna give us the investors list?
No. No, we can sneak in when they close. And we can hide in the basement and wait until dark.
Pick the lock. Well, that's the way we've got to do it. Let's do it.
Now, we have to be careful. This could be very dangerous. Someone else may be looking for the same thing.
You mean someone's watching us?
Well, you never know. This could be worth a lot of money. We just can't tell anyone.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm really good at evading invisible forces. It's right up my alley.
Well, let's go. Anna, did you change your hair or something? Well, go get ready.
So after SpectroPia, I started thinking about the fact that what I was doing was something almost like cinematic bunraku, that these things in some way were avatars. They were that there was a kind of puppetry going on, sometimes very literally, like with the Sally text-to-speech puppet, but also with just the kinds of ways that we were these kind of silent shadows as operators inhabiting and making this movie appear. And I started thinking about a new piece that I wanted to do, or I wanted to bust the movie off the screen and into the room with you. I started building robotic screens and thinking about this much more three-dimensional universe. The piece was really a kind of meditation on noise management, but it was also about what happens when image and human being are separated and live simultaneously in different worlds. So it was, in a sense, a piece about augmented reality and about the way we live in the real world and simultaneously in multiple social media communities at the same time and how we navigate that. The story is about Bean, a young designer of virtual personalities. She's so deeply engaged in her programming that it has escalated her skills into the realm of the supernatural. Her mind is like a live Twitter feed without the technology. She picks up what people think. She creates an avatar, an exaggerated alter ego that goes viral on the internet. And it makes her a minor celebrity. People stop her on the street, they want something, she isn't sure what it is. And the anxiety that from this noise exponentially increases her paranormal sensitivities, and a ghost from the past emerges from the noise. The piece that I'm going to, the little clip I'm going to show you now is a clip from the opening segment that was, it's a document from the premiere at Roulette in New York City, in Brooklyn.
My head got stuffed with people.
Something's going down. You know what it's been like since it went viral.
Static, noise.
Blackouts. There's something I haven't told you. The blank spaces have started to fill up with something. Actually, somebody else.
There's a
Blackout, but then there's noise. And suddenly I'm seeing out of somebody else's eyes. In some other time. And it feels like something's chasing me.
Why am I here? To be haunted? I wake suddenly from a dream. Am I going mad? What does she want? Haunted. Haunted. What does she want? She doesn't see. One need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors beyond material place. Haunted. Haunted. I'm losing ground, waiting.
So this piece was a tour de force of intranetting, because everybody was connected to everybody else. So I thought of it as a kind of gigantic video pop-up book that was operated by human operators who are not really, they're not playing characters, they're playing the whole stage instrument as if, you know, as if it were an instrument. So the model is more like music. Both SpectroPia and Lucid Possession have soundtracks that are, well, the SpectroPia soundtrack was completely composed by Elliot Sharp, and Elliot for Lucid Possession did a series of a song cycle, and Todd Reynolds live scored the movie. So I was thinking about moving from the stage back into the screen. We had a series of LED cans that were all connected to the computer, a fan for the robotic screens. The robotic screens could be moved using OSC controllers or by a technical director, or I could use motion sensing to move things on them. We had a whole series of different DMX connections so that our whole system really, when it moved into a theater, there were maybe 2 lighting cues in the theater. We sort of brought the whole show with us. And then it became animate in real time. It was really pieces. There's no way you can look at it unless you see it performed. And so I was sort of interested in that way in which it could be blown apart and fragmented and then suddenly kind of come together in this moment as a performance. I also got really fascinated. Well, the puppets, the video puppets in this, the heads that sit on the floor and the head of the avatar, use a vocal analysis program that's a neural net. It's what Luke calls a really dumb neural net. It's not very smart, but it learns your voice, so it gets better at lip syncing to you the more you use it. So instead of like Sally, where we typed in text and Sally would speak whatever it was you wanted to say, and you could pre-cue, you could save speeches for her and cue them just with a button on a keyboard, or you could type things in real time and have her speak them, and so she became like a kind of, a kind of improvisational player in the piece. So in this one, we had the puppets lip sync live to the characters, and there were a number of things that were really fascinating to me that happened with this piece that had to do with robotics and with the evolution of the costumes, the glowing LED costumes and the wearable stuff that we did. And I wanted to kind of get deeper into that, and I'll talk about that after this clip. This is the finale. I'll just show some of this with some of the music. This is Andrew Schneider and Hai-Ting Chin, I believe. We had a number of these screens that would drop down from the ceiling or come up from the floor and make things dimensional. And I'm scrubbing video across all the screens. Forward a little. Checking the time here. Am I running late? Okay, good. Okay, so that piece brought me back to the idea of wanting to do an installation again and bringing people off the street into the work, people who weren't sophisticated. I think the back and forth between installation and performance has to do with performance. You can have a system that has a steep learning curve, and it becomes more like playing an instrument, and your performers need to learn how to use it and be sophisticated about using it. But in an installation, you have to create an interface that is transparent, easy to learn, easy to grasp quickly, has a deeply complex background, all these kinds of possibilities. It's kind of the holy grail of interface. But sometimes it's not so easy to do. And so I started thinking about, I'm just going to, doing an installation. I started thinking a lot about a lot of the wearable, the explosion in wearable computing. When we first started working on lucid possession, and we were doing the costumes that you saw, and you'll see more of. Wait, if I can turn that off. Wait. There were no Raspberry Pis or little things that you could just stitch into clothing and flexible circuitry. We had somebody running around with a soldering gun after the costumes when we were shooting. And so none of this stuff existed, and this was just maybe 5 years ago, not very long ago. So I was interested in the explosion of wearable technologies, and in some of the directions that it was taking. And in a lot of cases, there was a kind of creepy merging of commodification and narcissism that I wanted to think about and play with a little bit. This series, the series I'm going to show you are some of the sketches that led up to building the ghost screen, the costumes for lucid possession, and then sort of how that influenced this next installation, which I'm still in the midst of making. So I'm going to show you a bunch of little kind of work in progress bits and pieces that I think might be interesting to just see how something gets made and how it evolves. So these were sketches for the original ghost screen that you just saw that were part of lucid possession. And it actually ended up looking somewhat like this. And this was the first iteration of it. We started out with doing just a music and spoken word piece, Mari Kimura, the violinist, and myself with the ghost screen. And then it evolved further, and this is Bean's avatar from lucid possession with the little, you can't see it right now, but the little screen on the floor, which is the talking head, and which also talks on the ghost. Then it evolved into the full screen piece engine, and then that was when I wrote the full script. Because I knew that if I wrote the script initially, before I had developed the full engine, that I would write essentially a screenplay for a single screen, and what I would end up with in the end is all these other things around it would be kind of like rickrack. So I knew that I had to develop the whole system so I could write to the whole system and think in terms of the whole system as a dimensional world. And these are some of the costumes. This was Bean's costume. All the characters had a single costume, and they never changed costumes, so they became a little bit like graphic novel characters. And that interested me too. This is Bora Yoon. The last one was Andrew Schneider and Bora Yoon. Bora Yoon played the bad girl. She's a singer, performer. This is Hai Ting Chin in the skirt that was the skirt that she wore on stage during the performance. And this is the sketch for the new project. It's called The Dress That Eats Souls. And it's a dress with a 14-foot skirt, and the skirt's made out of scrim, and then there's an overhead screen. The body of it is robotic, and it uses a Kinect. And when you stand in front of it, the dress speaks to you, and it asks you to move, and it mirrors your body movement. So it essentially behaves as if you're wearing it. And then it goes dark, and the overhead screen lights up, and then it goes back and forth between the robotics of the dress and the overhead screen, which allow a Kinect to track your head movement. It let you look around in a video space, but it moves back and forth between the dress talking about its own history, and it's 200 years old, and it takes you through 200 years of this sort of gradual, technology's gradual colonization of the human body, seen through the eyes of these various people who have worn these different iterations of the dress. So this was my initial sketch, and this was just a little maquette of how it was going to work with the scrim sails and the space for the viewer and the overhead screen. And then we started kind of building prototypes and making things out of Tyvek and, you know, sketching things out. This is the way I work. I create these kind of collage sketches that are put together in the computer, just collecting stuff from all over the place. And then this is, I'm working with a group called Brooklyn Research, who are building the robotics, and this was the underskirt that goes under the scrim. You can kind of see what the scrim behind it and over it. And then we, you know, the Tyvek was too soft, so I started thinking about vinyl cutting and how I was going to work with that. This is Fairbanks, my cat, who wanted to help. He had the wrong end of the brush. We're thinking about how to light the inside of it, how to put them together. We started using magnets. Magnets were hard to tape to surfaces. Then we used plastic rivets. I got my own vinyl cutter, you know, and this is gradually this whole thing evolving and getting to the point where it would be fastened on and be able to be lit from inside. And then when it was lit inside and the scrim was in front of it, the scrim would disappear, or we could project onto the scrim, or we could have it, you know, we can kind of manipulate these different layers. This is some of the diagrams from Brooklyn Research and their process of building the dress. This is a sketch of trying to, right now the torso's in Brooklyn and the skirt's in Manhattan. So we were trying to kind of figure out scale on some of the parts they were working on versus some of the parts I'm working on. This is a cardboard maquette for the metal frame that goes around the robot. This is the first test of Johnny Lou using the Kinect to move the... I thought the knife was a nice touch.
Lost me again. Okay, so that's... Yeah, that was
just it was like an early sketch trying to figure out how the software was going to work to make it map to your body. And then this is a more recent iteration of the robot, which is getting pretty serious. This is just a loop of its possible motion. And this is just a little film that shows you this is how the Kinect sees your head, that white cube. This is a little maquette of the dress that I have set up in the corner of the studio for developing the software and the projection system. So we're projecting on the skirt, and then the overhead, that cube, is how the Kinect sees your head. And then this, I just shot some video on my iPhone, looking up, looking straight ahead, looking down, looking straight ahead, looking right, looking left. I made a mistake in the first sketch and realized that your head actually doesn't swivel to 90 degrees when you look right and left. So it kind of screwed up the illusion. But so this is like the model for how the media part will work. Oh, this went too fast. Okay. And so that's the project that's under development now. It'll probably be finished by next year. There'll be 10 different decades that you go through, you know, as the dress develops, and it will be an installation. And then this is a project. This is the beginnings of a project that's just in development that is called the Solar Wind Coat. And I started to think a lot about interface, embodied interface, and about the idea of scaling embodied interface up. And I was sitting in an outdoor theater performance space in Brooklyn last summer, and there was something going on the stage that was sort of interesting but not terribly interesting, and there was some sound stuff happening, and the birds that were in a tree nearby were responding to the sound, and it was in a channel for air travel, so airplanes were going over in the sky, and I started thinking about what would happen if this open theater space included the birds and that, was responding to the airplane, had this sense of scale to it, in other words, and then I started thinking about how to scale up embodied interface. So the solar wind coat has an SMS chip embedded in it that receives a live data stream from NASA's solar wind satellites and then translates it into patterns that are woven into fiber optics that are in part of the coat. And I just thought about the idea of energy and about how this solar energy is passing through us all the time, and we're looking at this entity that's a real entity, and yet it's so abstracted to us in a lot of ways. And I just wanted to do something that brought you in touch with that energy interface. And this will be essentially this is kind of like Spider-Man's suit that you're seeing. So it will turn into something that has like a little story attached to it, but it's in the early days. So I let you, behind the screen today, behind the curtain, show you some.
We have a little time for a few questions.
And I'm sorry, I've been popping my peas. I can pop.
So does anybody have any questions? There's a question there.
See if you can find my glasses.
Yep.
No, they're oh wait. They're gonna be here.
Hello.
Okay.
Is this on? Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your talk. I just as a student, I had a very much more bare bones practical question in terms of maybe you could talk a little bit about how these types of projects are funded and how this stuff kind of gets produced, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's gotten gradually more and more difficult. Basically, what I usually do when I'm starting a project, there are several stages. I'm usually working with a programmer to develop behaviors or to develop an engine, writing a script, and writing grant proposals all at the same time, so that I'm constantly looking for different sorts of funding resources. So part of the kind of development phase of a piece is looking at all the different possible foundations, any kind of government organizations. I'm starting now to look more towards potential individual funders, which means starting to kind of create, it's almost like creating your own little, Kickstarter, living room Kickstarter campaign or something. So, crowdsourcing, but you need to go, find people who can support projects like this. So I think you start small and do the things that are possible to do, and then gradually develop it into something larger. A lot of people will create like they might create an edition of coats, or they might, like I have a Sally, the Sally, bubble dance piece. I have that as a kind of framed monitor piece. You could sell multiples. You could work within the gallery scene. I don't do that much because I don't really like the art world very much. Kind of was in it for a while. It made me crazy. So I've done more of a kind of the first iteration. But I have to say, it's getting more difficult to do large-scale pieces. But it depends. If you put them more within the realm of music, or you have to frame things in a reasonable way to think in terms of their presentation. And I find for myself that there's always a bit of a tension between wanting to make something that is new and interesting and breaks a lot of rules, and would ultimately, if it got standardized, create its own architecture and its own, or kind of retrofitting something to a system that it wasn't made for. So basically, when you're working with this kind of stuff, pretty much everything is a kludge. I don't know if you know that the term kludge. Kludge is like when you kind of put something together and fake it. It's kind of like, gum and paper paper clips and stuff, but it works. It's great. It's fine. It's a kludge. So pretty much everything has to be a kludge if you're not working within a standardized channel. And I chose to get off the path with a machete. It's what I wanted to do. And so it's interesting, and you get to do what you want, but you pay for it. So it's an old Spanish proverb, I think. Take what you want, pay for it.
Hi, so when you were showing us the videos, you were talking about using the entire stage to create a new language of expression. What did you hope to express through this language?
Were you talking about a particular piece or altogether?
No, when you were just, I forgot which video it was after, but you were talking about using your artistic forms to create a new language. So what exactly did you hope to express through this language?
That's a hard question to answer. I mean, I think earlier one of the things that I was talking about was how working with innovative and new technologies, I'm working with a set of technologies that are transforming the world that we all live in as we're living in it. And when you have your hands on those technologies and you're starting to evolve things, you're looking at the way in which they're impacting your culture, or I'm looking at the way they're impacting the culture that I live in, how that might affect narratives, how that might change practices that have gone before me. I'm trying to think critically about the way the world that I'm living in is being changed, so that I'm not just status quo about it. It's not just everything's fine, whatever they do is cool, or whatever is done to me is cool. Or I think Robert Smithson, the earth artist, said at one point that he said, it's not that I'm being critical, I'm just interested in examining the apparatus I'm being threaded through. And so, I mean, I think it's important for all of us to have a critical experience of the things that are changing the world we live in, because we can change them back. We can collectively decide to have an impact on that if it doesn't work. So you want to understand what's going on. So I think that's part of what I'm interested in the way things work. So I'm interested in taking things apart and putting them back together, and thinking deeply about the culture I live in, and how it affects people, and how it's affecting me and you.
Thank you for the lecture. It's really great. But I have a question about, because I came in a little late, so I might miss some parts. But I'm wondering, because you did a lot of sort of live performance, but then from the videos I've seen, it seems like you're rarely interacting with the audience. Is that correct?
No,
yeah.
I don't do audio.
Right.
I have at certain points. When I started out with SpectroPia, we did some things where we had, people ask Sally questions and stuff, but I thought it was dumb, so I didn't do it. So usually, at one point I was saying, usually what I do, I work back and forth between installation and performance. So in the performances, the performers are interacting with an engine, but they're interacting with it, you think of them more as if they were like musicians playing an instrument, because it's a more elaborate and skilled process. With installation, that's more like, I would say, audience participation. So I think of that's the way I move back and forth. I'm myself not particularly interested in finding ways of getting like a whole room full of people to interact with something. I haven't found a way in which that works well in terms of the narrative things that I'm interested in. I mean, it's certainly it's not like I'm saying that's a bad way to work. It's not. It's an interesting way to work. It's just not the way I work. Anybody else? There's a girl over there.
Years to accomplish and to get funding, and kind of take a vision and just keep plugging away. And new language means a kind of a way of expressing yourself that when people observe it or participate in it, it shifts your brain a little bit. And I think with
It
all
surprises you into seeing the world around you in a different way.
Exactly.
Things you thought turn out not to be true or true. Or
And really, if you think
different
about the media that we daily deal with, it's a particular type of rhythm, it's a particular type of behavior that programs our brains. So an artist who plays with media in interesting ways and really pushes it in ways that's unexpected and strange, it's really an important role because it shifts our brain patterning. It breaks the pattern and possibly opens up a little window to looking at the world differently, which we want. We don't want all to have the same vision and all to have the same uniform way of seeing the world. So I thank you for sharing that vision, and on Thursday we're going to have Toni explain a little more about her process.
And I'll have artificial changelings and Sally and the talking puppets there for people to.
Yeah, we're going to be on the other side of campus. So we're going to go from north to south to California Nanosystems Institute, and Toni's going to do some hands-on with some of the technology you've seen, and then that will be followed by our monthly Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous with some pretty amazing people, and you're all invited. So thank you for coming, and thank you, Toni Dove.
Thank you.